Today we are covering the critical topic of earnest money deposits for the national portion of the real estate exam. This concept is central to how sales contracts function in practice and is a frequent source of questions on the licensing test. Earnest money is fundamentally a show of good faith from the buyer to the seller. It signals that the buyer is serious and has some skin in the game. While the amount is often between 1 and 3% of the purchase price, you must remember for the exam that there is no law requiring a specific amount or even any earnest money at all for a contract to be legally binding. One of the most common traps on the exam is a question asking what is required for a valid contract. They will list earnest money as an option, but the correct answer is consideration, which is the exchange of promises between the buyer and seller. When a buyer makes an offer and it is accepted, that earnest money must be handled with extreme care. The exam will test your knowledge of how these funds are managed. Typically, the money is held in a neutral escrow account or a broker's specialized trust account. You need to be very clear on the definitions of commingling and conversion. Commingling occurs if a broker places earnest money into their own personal or general business account. Even if the broker never spends a dime of that money, the act of mixing the funds is a violation. Conversion is a step further, where the broker actually spends the client's money for business or personal expenses. The exam will often present a scenario where a broker is short on rent and uses a deposit with the intention of paying it back. This is conversion and is a serious breach of fiduciary duty. The status of the earnest money depends heavily on the outcome of the transaction. If the sale goes through, the earnest money is credited to the buyer at closing, reducing the total amount of cash they need to bring to the table. However, if the deal falls apart, the contract dictates who keeps the money. This is where contingencies come in. A contingency is a condition that must be met for the contract to remain binding. If a buyer has a financing contingency and their loan is rejected through no fault of their own, they are legally entitled to receive their earnest money back in full. The same applies to an inspection contingency, where the buyer and seller cannot agree on repairs. On the exam, if you see a scenario where a contingency was not satisfied, the answer will almost always be that the earnest money is returned to the buyer. On the flip side, we have the concept of liquidated damages. If the buyer simply walks away from the deal for a reason not covered by a contingency, such as getting cold feet or finding another house they like better, they are in breach of contract. In most standard real estate contracts, the earnest money serves as liquidated damages for the seller. This means the seller's compensation for the buyer's breach is limited to the amount of the earnest money deposit. The exam might ask what happens if the buyer defaults, and you should look for the option that mentions liquidated damages. To help you remember these rules, keep the phrase "earnest escrow equals evidence" in mind. This reminds you that the money is held in escrow. It serves as evidence of the buyer's good faith, and it is handled according to the evidence provided by the contract contingencies. Remember that the broker or escrow agent is a neutral party and cannot unilaterally decide who gets the money in a dispute. If the buyer and seller cannot agree on the release of funds, the broker must often keep the money in the trust account until a court order or a written release from both parties is provided. This is a common exam point regarding the broker's responsibility in a failed transaction. Understanding these nuances will ensure you are prepared for any earnest money questions the national exam throws your way. The exam may also ask about the timing of deposits. While state laws differ, the general standard is that the broker must deposit the funds into the trust account within a very short window, typically 3 business days. Failure to do so is a regulatory violation. Always remember that earnest money is negotiable, and the amount is decided by the parties, not by law or by the agent. By keeping these distinctions in mind, you will be well equipped to answer any question regarding deposits on your exam day.